And we're live. Welcome, everybody, here to the Lakers Lounge. I'm Anthony Irwin, joined in this very special edition of the show for the first time in literal years. I'm talking a long time ago that we were able to do this. I am joined by Harrison Fagan and his coach dad, Pete Zayas. Harrison joins us of SB Nation. Pete joins us of the LFR pod. Both of you were formerly co-hosts on Locked On Lakers back when I was doing that. I am thrilled for this podcast. I cannot possibly overstate how excited I am to do this. And for it to come on a very special day is also, it's pretty fitting. Every year this comes, it's a big day in the Irwin household. Every single year, you wake up in the morning and the kids run and jump on you and they scream at the top of their lungs, Daddy, 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 it's NBA Eve. The NBA comes back tomorrow.
I thought you were going to say City Edition release day. The kids are just, they're really hyped.
No, I wish they would. I wish they would actually release the City jerseys like into the sun. Just fire them all off there. I have no idea
release
why.
them when they release a player, it's like, the City Edition jerseys have been released per Woj,
Nike has requested waivers on the City Edition jerseys. Yes, that would be great. I'm going to get out of the way. Harrison, how you holding up? You ready? The off season is finally officially basically over.
Yeah, no, I just first I just want to say I appreciate Pete dropping his restraining order to do this podcast, and Anthony, I appreciate you doing this on such a special day for you. It's your birthday. I just 45 great. Has never looked better, and
I think it has.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Like you look at some of the other 45-year-olds. I think they look a little better than I do.
I saw it's Ryan Reynolds' birthday today, and they're like, he's 49, and I was like, oh. Wow, he looks younger than me.
Do I share a birthday with Ryan Reynolds? I had no idea.
Apparently so. Yeah.
I to this day I think this is still the case, but the most famous person I shared a birthday with was Weird Al Yankovic. Like that was the one I was most proud of. Pete, how are you holding up, man? I feel like of the three of us, you are probably the most excited for the events that will come in, roughly 24 hours or so.
Well, first, happy birthday. Yeah, man, no, I'm super excited about this season. I think it's the most anticipated one since that first year that we got AD, after the championship, the 21 season, everybody was so tired. It was like, oh crap, the season's starting already, and then, the next season was like, okay, we'll see how this works after the Russ trade and whatnot. And we saw how that happened. And then, but this year, guys, it's like, a lot of optimism in the air, a lot of could be, but a lot of work ahead to get to where we want to go. And boy, oh boy, Denver Nuggets on opening night, right? The NBA certainly has a sense of humor.
Yeah, it's got to be LeBron's like 15th ring night in his 21-year career or something between all of them.
The ones that he didn't win, he has to play that team every year.
I do feel like that's happened a lot.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. He's been the NBA's biggest draw for the entirety of his career. But Pete, you mentioned the optimism, and I share a lot of that optimism as well. And you guys will hear that over the course of this episode. But at the behest and one of our listens, JD, gave me the idea for a segment that I think will prove very fruitful here by the end of the show. And over the course of the show, Harrison, Pete, I need you guys to come up with the thing that you think I will get just unnecessarily annoyed at by the end of the year and how quickly that will actually transpire. So over the course of the show, maybe think about that. If you're in the comment section, let us know what your theory on that might be. Again, a reminder to everybody, hit subscribe on YouTube, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, all of that good stuff. Get your 5-star reviews, those topics in as soon as possible so that we can read them. I will get to them tonight for the lowdown in preparation for tomorrow night's opener. And I do want to start with the Nuggets thing because Pete, I think you and I see pretty eye to eye on this. In like the amounts of shit that they have talked, and they have deserved they deserve the opportunity to talk all their shit. They won the championship. They are the reigning champs. they get to talk as much as they want. That said, I think the Lakers also reserve the right to respond however they want. And frankly, the way that they respond in these matchups is gonna kind of define a big chunk of their season. So, like, what do you think about the quote unquote rivalry or relationship here between the Nuggets and Lakers now that each team has knocked each other out of the Western Conference en route to a championship now over the last few years? This is honestly the thing I am most excited about this season.
Yeah, I think it's a great budding rivalry. We've had these sort of, obviously the Celtics are the across all times and eras, but like the Kings rivalry was great. We had a blip with the Spurs for, where we were both concurrently good, and they don't always last until I don't think, Laker fans right now are super like, I hate the Spurs unless you're a certain age, right? But they're fun when they kind of rise out of the actual basketball, like you were saying, Anthony. And that's what's happened since 2020.
Yeah.
And both teams after 2020 had a certain degree of injury issues. And obviously Denver had a lot more continuity and made some solid moves along the way. But they got all of their guys last year and got their feet underneath them. And they had an awesome run, a 16-4 record to the championship. Like we had a 16-5 record in 2020, like really dominant runs. And so I would love for there to be a round three, Harrison, like between these two teams. And I'm super curious to see what a kind of different Lakers team looks like matched up against the Nuggets this year.
And I just want to add that to your point about these like little rivalries sort of popping up, like there was sort of the thing, the clip that maybe all of us are most famous for was that brief one with the Clippers that never really played out on the court. It just played out on billboards across Los Angeles. But it's also always funny to me that, the Lakers you said that for Lakers fans, like they don't necessarily hate the Spurs for that sort of mini rivalry, what was it, 15, 18-ish years ago now, 10 years ago in some ways. Lakers fans may not feel that way, but like every team that the Lakers have had it with, that's still like the Lakers are still their number one arch enemy. They're like, absolutely it's the Mad Men gif of
that's
like, I just hate you.
That struck me about the Denver response. I remember doing the LFR pod as they were finishing that series, and I was like, "Tally ho, good chaps! Well played series. You're the better team. Go win the championship, right?" And they're on the other end, like, "Yeah, fuck the Lakers!" Right? Just like the energy was totally
at the end of Return of the Jedi. They have like our decapitated heads by the fire, and they're like pounding on them with drumsticks, like.
And it didn't occur to me until they had that response, and then I thought about it, and then exactly what you said, Harrison. It was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. They would like lost the 7 series against us before then, so like their energy for us was just in a totally different place than ours.
Yeah, I love that sentiment because look, after the sweep, it was just kind of like you lick your wounds, you kind of move on or whatever. And then when they did win their first championship, and I'm not gonna lie, like I have some friends who cover the team and who care about that team. So I was trying to be really gracious for a really long time, and then they talked enough shit that now I'm just like, you know what? Yeah, fuck you. I was so happy for you guys, and then it was just like, and then what was it? The one dude called Mike Malone Lakers daddy or something like that. I'm like,
Vic Lombardi, the Nuggets
too far.
Play-by-play guy. Yeah. I the moment where it clicked for me, I couldn't believe that the DNVR guys put a life-size poster of you up and used it as a dartboard at the bar. That was unbelievable, and just that that disrespectful.
Yeah, that was that. I talked to Adam about that. I said, just like, look, you could do anything, just not my face. Like, just you could. Harrison's head, I feel like, is a lot more bullseye-ish than mine. But I guess
a big target.
Let's talk about the actual Lakers though, and why we are optimistic in the way that they are, because it was something that I realized in preparation for the show. I just have kept on saying, "Oh my God, they're good! Oh my God, they're good! Oh my God, they're good!" And on some occasions, obviously dove a little deeper into why I feel that way. But Harrison, what's like when you look at this team, what's your greatest source of optimism for it? What is the thing that you kind of lean into and you say, like, all right, if the Lakers are going to be the kind of good that I think that they are going to be, What would be the number reason for that?
I think for me, it's just that this is the first year in at least 2 seasons. I think the 3 seasons ago they had a pretty good idea when they were coming off the title how they were going to play and stuff like that. But I think that this season is a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways, just because it's the first one in a while where there are 0 questions about how the starting lineup fits together and how the continuity is going to work and sort of what this team is good at for the most part. You know, there may be things with some of the new additions that they get better at or that they get worse at or whatever. But overall, you know, how the Lakers are going to attack you, how they're going to play defense, you know, there aren't a ton of huge question marks about how sort of their best players fit together. Like, you know, even if, you know, I think as Pete and I were, you know, even if you were an optimist about the Russ trade or, you know, you were a huge pessimist about it, there were huge questions about how that was going to work the last 2 years. And this year, there's just almost none of that. Like, you know, you can have questions about D'Angelo Russell as a playoff player or, you know, any of his foibles. You can wonder how much better is Austin Reeves going to get? What kind of steps can he take this year? All of that stuff. How long can LeBron last? But there's no doubt about when those 4 guys are on the court. And to be honest, with Taurean Prince looking pretty good as the 5th starter, just sort of how that unit, when it's all healthy and when it's all looking, is going to be its best.
Yeah, I could tell that the team is going to be pretty good because of the things that like I'm noticing our conversations on Twitter, right? There isn't like the heated conversation. The most heated I think things have gotten is as it pertains to the Lakers 5th starter. I have come around to and came around fairly quickly to the idea of Taurean Prince being the 5th starter. Initially, I thought it was going to be Rui because of the extension, because of what we saw in the playoffs. And if it wasn't going to be Rui, I thought it would be Vanderbilt because of the defense and all that stuff. Pete, where do you land on that? Where do you land on the 5th starter?
So I really like the Prince fit. And it's really more about fit than anything else. He's a professional off-ball player. And so he's a good shooter that can attack closeouts, that knows when to curl, when to pop out behind the 3-point line. And so it's sort of this missing piece more than it is like an individual evaluation of him as a player versus Rui as a player versus Vando as a player. It's like, how do you fit on both ends? Now, I am curious, and this Denver game is going to be a great test of this, the level of physicality that starting unit can get to, right? Like Denver is a team that can attack in transition. They can attack you on the glass. Lord knows that Jokic requires more than one person to handle. And so can that unit be physical enough to defend and to not give up points around the rim? We'll see. I mean, having Anthony Davis is a great start to have some degree of protection around the hoop. But I think they're going to score a ton of points. So yeah, I really like the Prince idea because I think he fits that unit in particular.
Yeah, I just like the idea, and I've made this analogy now a few times over, but I like the idea of the starting group being, you know, very hyper efficient in the half court. They execute their asses off. You know, there's a bunch of there like isn't a bad offensive option out there, right? Whether it's D'Angelo Russell in the pick and roll, Austin Reeves in the pick and roll, that LeBron guy, and then the ball finds occasionally Taurean Prince wide open for 3. And oh yeah, there's that pterodactyl who can basically finish anything at the rim and appears confident in taking his jumpers this year. That starting group is going to be really difficult to defend. And then I also like the idea when you look at Gabe Vincent, when you look at, you know, maybe Max Christie spend some time with that second unit, Rui, Vanderbilt, and especially Jackson Hayes if he gets some minutes in there. But I like the idea of hyper efficient offensive team, super professional over here, and then absolute chaos with the second group, you know, defend their asses off, get out in transition and speed up the game to keep the other team on their toes. I like that idea with the interchangeability of that. And then, you know, obviously sometimes you'll have starters playing with whatever unit and that those lineups will have their own identity as well. But Harrison, do you like the idea of like the Athenians in 300 who just come in and occasionally stab each other because it's kind of like it's so chaotic, but it kind of works out?
I gotta say, I appreciate you using a historical reference for Pete. He doesn't watch like a lot of movies, and you know, it's a little bit like Raj, you know.
Hey, you know, Anthony got that historical reference from a movie, though.
Yes, that's true, but you still got it because it's a historical movie.
Fair.
I do have to say I enjoy the idea of chaos as a positive descriptor after so much of the last 2 years. Again, I hate to keep taking it back to that, but it's
Yeah.
also, we're previewing a new season, and it's just, it's fun how the language has sort of changed meanings. And yeah, I mean, I think that there is a little bit of concern to me about the bench, just
Me
given
too.
sort of the way that we've watched it operate during the preseason. There's only one ball is like such a tired sort of complaint about how star duos are going to fit together. But with this bench, it might be a legitimate complaint, given sort of the way that we've seen Rui and Christian Wood seem to have the greenest of green lights, and may actually, like Will Smith and Carlton, like brawl each other for the ball at some point. In one of these second units, and how much they sort of want to go cook and have been told that that is their thing to go do. So, I mean, there's a little bit of concern to me just with how those units are going to score on some nights. I think it's going to look really bad, but I also think that there's a lot of talent there. And I think that, as guys sort of start to lock in more for the season and, take the basketball, I think, a little bit more seriously, that some of that will get better. And I think there are a lot of nights where, like you said, that chaos is going to look good, where they're going to, the other team can't figure out what they're going to do because they don't necessarily know. And, I think that having the starters with those guys more also, sort of as part of those staggered units, it's not going to be hockey subs, is going to help a lot in that respect. Because it's one thing for Rui or Christian Wood to be like, I am shooting every single time I touch the ball, when it's an all bench group out there in a preseason game in Palm Springs. But it's another thing for them to try and do that with LeBron on the floor with them.
Yeah.
And so I think some of that is going to get better as the games start to count.
And I think there's some of that gets alleviated when they have more organizing forces on the floor. Like that bench group, with Wood and Rui in the last game got outscored 50-17 in like 15 and a half minutes in the last game. But for most of that time, Cam Reddish was their
Cam
point
Reddish
guard.
was the initiator.
You know what I'm saying? And so in that group with LeBron, it's LeBron that's deciding where the ball goes. And that to me is where Rui and Wood are going to be at their best, is where they're pure finishers, where it's LeBron, D'Lo, Gabe Vincent, Austin, that are deciding kind of the initial action. And then the ball just gets swung to them in a position where it's like, take the shot, But I have a similar concern, though, Harrison, in that I do think that sort of mentality can kind of get fostered in individual guys, where they start kind of going off and doing their own thing a little too much. And sometimes that's going to be Rui on a 1-on-3 sprinting up the sidelines. And he's like, should I go for it or should I pull it back? And this preseason, it's been go for it every time. And that's part of what the preseason is for, right? But you can't like totally resolve that issue by just having like, oh, LeBron will handle the ball or Austin will handle the ball. There is going to have to be some of that, like swing the ball and execute, that the starting unit, I think, is going to have a lot of, where I don't think, Anthony, we can change totally, mid-game or halfway through the first quarter in terms of the type of team that we are. Although I do appreciate the point about the chaos. Let's just make sure it's wrangled and pointed in the right direction.
It's like small doses of chaos occasionally.
Yes.
Controlled chaos. You know.
Yeah. So not chaos.
I want to ask you, Pete, about Rui, because he's the one guy that I have had expectations for, who I have wanted to see more from in the preseason, right? And it wasn't because of injuries. I think some of it is because of the way that he's being used. I think some of it is because of like just kind of who he is as a player, and he's trying to figure out like how to fit with and fit and mesh with different units. And his kind of de facto approach is, well, I'll just score my way through stuff and operate as a release valve. But I feel like with this preseason, the way that he was being utilized was like too much of the release valve. He just wasn't really a big enough part, I thought, of some of the sets or some of the actual system. Did you notice any of that with Rui? Because it was the kind of thing that I kept bumping on it. I kept hoping to see him in some kind of a dribble handoff or setting a screen for somebody or something like that, where he was kind of standing in the corner waiting for the shot clock to get to 7 seconds, and then he would be able to go to work.
Yeah, he may be the player that's impacted negatively the most offensively by the offense switch. The 5-out style is a lot more ball and player movement, and it's a lot more read and react, whereas 4-out is more, you have wider driving lanes to the basket. And so Rui being primarily an off-ball player in a 4-out is a very simple, like, shoot the three or pump fake and drive to the basket. And if somebody's in the way, make that nice pull-up jumper. And so there's been some of that this preseason where he'll start in the left corner. He's a very right-hand dominant player. And so starting him out in the left corner, kind of most of his attacks will go to the right. And so a lot of those handoffs that are going from AD or Hayes at the top of the key that, flow into a handoff, he's had some pull-ups and some drives to the rack off of that I think that will come in time. And that to me is part of the start of this season for me, guys, is that, like, not everything is going to be solved right away, or not every plan, because there's so many facets to basketball where it's like you can get 95% of the stuff right from jump and then still have 100 things to work on in the other 5%, And so I think there is going to be a certain amount of an adjustment process. I think the coaches would probably say, so long as Rui's defending and rebounding, that he'll be okay. He's such a threat as a 3-level scorer that it'll get figured out. But that I think is part of the process of the early part of this season, is a guy like Rui being like, okay, what are my 5-out reads from my spot versus the 4-out reads?
Yeah, I'm not so far concerned that I don't think it's solvable. And at the end of the day, like, I think on this team, and as part of the Lakers culture, like, talent just kind of wins out, right? And I think that's why they've had the amount of success in, developing younger guys or finding guys who maybe, didn't look as good in other situations, and they come here and they tend to look a little bit better. Some of that's Phil Handy, some of that is the entire development staff. But I think also there's this culture of, it's the counter to Paul Westhead in the Winning Time series, right, where everything was so system based and the system comes before all of the talent. And I think in this case, it's more, and that's kind of why I'm excited for the 5-out approach here, where it is a lot more talent based. Let's just see how we can get the most talented guys involved together the most often. And that's why I think eventually, even though I think Taurean Prince is a better fit to start games, I do hope to see Rui closing them. And a big part of that will be how he figures some of this stuff out. Harrison, here's my, like, number one question going into the season. And I don't think there's any way to feel any kind of definitive on this, but Darvin Ham had, I think, one of the weirdest rookie head coaching seasons ever.
It's got to be up there,
I make
right?
this point too.
Yeah,
that could have gone so much worse than it did.
Oh my goodness.
I don't think we appreciate
maybe it's
that.
not the weirdest, like, I'd have to really dive back into NBA history. I'm sure there were weirder ones in the early days of the league and stuff.
I mean, the
Certainly
way Paul Westhead got his job was pretty weird. Yeah.
That's fair. But he is certainly among the most experienced second-year head coaches, I would say, ever. And
he saw a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
I think he even made that joke that he saw everything his rookie season.
Darvin Ham, who, like, famously got shot as a kid, comes out of that season like, I saw some shit.
It's a good thing. It was a good lifestyle choice on his part to go bald before last season, because we would have seen it falling out. Maybe it would have regrown on the during the playoff run.
He grew his hair back to lose it
again.
again. Yeah. But Harrison, how confident are you in Darvin going into the season? Because, I thought we saw some really good stuff. I think the way that he kept everybody invested throughout the season was a bit of a miracle, frankly. And position them in a spot where they could take off once the roster made more sense. But we also had some stretches where, while the roster didn't make as much sense, I don't think he necessarily helped it all that much with all the tiny little guard lineups. So I'm mostly confident in him, but where do you stand on him heading into this year?
I'm pretty confident in him, and I think that you hit on the exact reason why, in terms of how he kept everyone engaged during what was, with all due respect to how Paul Westphal got his job, like a car wreck of a season, and there was
not a bike wreck.
Yeah, I guess it would have been a bike wreck. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was quite it was just one of the strangest seasons I've ever covered, been around, just in terms of, because normally if things go that badly, they don't turn around anywhere near to that degree at midseason. Now, maybe you make a trade, you like kind of fight your way in. It's like, like your cute 8 seed that, takes the defending champs or the number 1 seed or whatever to 1 game or to 5 games or something like that. And you make that level of improvement, but you don't normally go from a team that was honestly terrible for a decent chunk of last season and to start the season to go all the way to the conference finals. And the way that he kept everyone bought in during that, I think is sort of the most important job of a head coach. That is the stuff to me that is not replaceable. Like almost all of these guys know X's and O's, pretty much everyone that reaches a head coaching job knows X's and O's pretty well. There's a bunch of assistants that you can get that know X's and O's. I'm not trying to downplay that a whole lot with Coach Pete on the pod. It is important, but a lot of guys, a lot of NBA coaches, they have some level of mastery at that, certainly more than any of us could ever hope to glean. But the ability
except for Byron,
different,
but yeah, go ahead.
The ability to keep different personalities, bought in over the course of that season, and to even have a guy like Lonnie Walker, where he was completely out of the rotation, be able to come in and he ready to make an impact, during that playoff series, I think is a testament to how Ham sort of, everybody wanted to play hard for him. And I think that is one of the most important qualities that you can have as a head coach.
I agree that is the most important quality a head coach can have. I also think that in both seasons, he aligned his system to the talent. And so that was kind of to your point earlier, Anthony, about the supremacy of the system in a different type of mindset, and then the talent having to fit into that. Talent still needs a system, even if you prioritize that talent. And I think that's part of my optimism going into this season, Anthony, is I had 2 things I wanted to see I was hoping to see from Darvin. And I wasn't sure if he'd do either of them. And one was the switch to 5 out. I thought it was more conducive to our like pass, shoot, dribble type of personnel. And I'd been saying this all summer. And so the fact that he did that, I was really stoked about. And then just sizing up in terms of lineups, that proclivity to go smaller, I think, especially seeing it this preseason, I think he was trying to get enough shooting on the floor to be able to run what he wanted to run. Sure. For sure.
All of their talent was in small people. Like it was just,
and I get that, but there's also a tipping point where you are too small to like the other team can just spam something ridiculous because like Pat Bev is guarding Jimmy Butler,
Yeah.
Never forget. Oof. Pat Bev starting 3.
He was a small forward. Like I've made that joke before. He was a very small forward. But
the Austin Reeves at center lineup will live in infamy forever, even though it was only for like 2 minutes of a game they were probably going to lose anyway. But yeah.
But I think to your point though, Pete, like the thing that showed there to me was, like I don't think there was a solution to that situation, right? I don't know if any coach could have stepped up there and offered a fix to the roster at the beginning of last year.
Oh, I thought that was if not the optimized version, it was close to it. Like for talking about all the small lineups and things like that, that could have gone so much worse than it did. He built an offense. Even compared to the year before, where we had like Carmelo Anthony and Malik Monk, there was at least some degree of counter gravity on the perimeter of guys you had to guard. We had none of that to start the season.
Yeah.
That's why, Matt Ryan is playing in our rotation on opening night, right? And so he built an offense where he was like, all right, we've got to get to the rim. And so it shows up in all these statistical ways that people bitch about. Like, it's like, oh, Lakers led the league in free throw attempts. That was 100% by strategy, that they ran all these different 4-out ball screen type of combinations where it was like, I know I got to drive to the basket. I got to drive to the basket, and we're going to find a way to do it, even though everybody knows what we got to do to even have a chance. And so, coaching like that is actually really hard, and that can go really, really wrong, like way more wrong than it did last season. So, it could have been much worse than it was.
It's like, hey, guys, you got to maintain a certain level of buy-in to just be like, hey, guys, you just got to catapult yourselves at the rim again tonight.
That's right.
I know that there's going to be like 5 guys there. You have to just run at full speed and throw yourself towards them and, try and make the ball go in. But let's see if we can get free throws. But just like head first, I know
I just picture
we'll
that
have the ice baths ready after the game.
remember when we were kids and like anytime a cartoon character like bumped their head, that like bandage, like the X bandage would pop up on their
Yeah.
forehead or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. Like I just picture Ham in the locker room where everybody that he's talking to has a whole bunch of those X bandages all over their face. Like,
They look
hey
like
guys,
the
we
Goon
need,
Squad
we need to
after
keep it
the
going.
first half of Space Jam. Just
But yeah, no, Pete, like that's a version of the point I guess I was trying to make, is that I think that like him finding, at least, even though there wasn't an like there was no version of that team that was going to make sense, but he like tried to find a solution that at least maintained some buy-in there. That gives me the optimism for this year, right? Is that like, well, we and also, as soon as the roster made some sense, the coaching magically improved, right? Like it was a group that made sense, and all of a sudden, like, holy crap, like it turns out if you give Darvin Ham decent players, then you'll get some decent results there. So I have some questions about, like, I know that he likes to play kind of a longer rotation in the regular season, and that can sometimes lead to 5 bench guy units. And I don't necessarily think that would be the best thing for this team. But like, he also has a reason for doing that, right? Those minutes might be kind of frustrating while we're watching them, and are probably not going to be great when we look at the end of the year at like total net ratings and stuff like that with those lineups. But the point is maintaining buy-in from guys at the end of that rotation, so that when that time comes, that Lonnie Walker needs to step up in that series. Shit, remember Rui wasn't in the rotation as much at the end of the year, right? And then all of a sudden he steps up and becomes a very important playoff player, and it was because in part, whether it was behind closed doors, Darvin making sure to say, hey, we're going to need you at some point. We're going to need you at some point. And that's something that not every coach does, is to like really check in and make sure that a player feels like they are still needed, even though they aren't in the rotation, or it's in those reps that that whichever player it was got over the course of the season, that maybe in a moment didn't make a whole bunch of sense, but does wind up paying dividends later in the year when that player steps up and to us comes kind of out of nowhere, but to a coaching staff that has as much trust in those players didn't, right? That was always what Ham always said when he would be asked about, can you believe what you got out of Lonnie? Fuck yeah, I could believe what I got out of Lonnie. Like, yeah, do you see that guy? Do you see how talented that guy is? That's the kind of stuff and I also think, like, Pete, I'll let you speak on this too, and go a little more in depth on like the X's and O's thing, because a lot of time with black head coaches, you get like he maintains player belief.
Oh yeah, he's a player's coach, right?
And all that stuff,
couldn't
right? But
couldn't know shit about X's and O's though, right?
But like, one thing that really struck me
really good.
Yeah, like over the course of the preseason, the Lakers were generating so many clean looks. It was striking. So, like, what have you seen there? Like, where has he drawn the most success there?
Well, that's what I'm talking about with the lineup switch, right? And the scheme switch from the 4 out to the 5 out. It's that, like, for example, all the empty side pick and rolls that we're running, teams like to switch a lot of stuff and setting a step up screen, and having Jackson Hayes bounce off that and roll to the rim. Like, hey, you got an alley-oop opportunity, right? All of the delays and delay Chicago handoffs into the corners and whatnot. And like, even within the course of the playoffs, right? Like, our ATOs are good. Like, that's the thing I don't think people appreciate enough about Darvin, is that he is kind of a basketball nerd. And all of the minutia of that stuff. It's not just I'm gonna put my arm around a guy and tell him I really believe in you and all that. And that stuff's not just important, it's the most important thing, the buy-in, of course, right? But that below that, this is a guy whose basketball journey has taken him all over the world. And when he was a player, he wasn't a point guard, like, oh yeah, that guy's gonna be a coach. Like Derek Fisher, Jason Kidd, when they were playing, we're like, yeah, that guy's gonna be a coach. Darvin wasn't that one of those type of guys, but he was in all sorts of corners of the basketball world that were not, big arenas with loud screaming fans, and he learned a little bit along the way, and he learned a little bit at every stop along the way, and that has added up to this really, like, again, the switch in the scheme and the sizing up of lineups going against what I thought his proclivities were last year. Like, that's not easy for a coach to do. It's very easy for a coach to get set in their ways. And so you have to have a really diverse, like, kind of basketball education to be able to be like, oh, this team is this thing. And then this next year's team is actually kind of the opposite thing in some ways, Harrison. And so that ability to recognize that within the X's and O's too, I think is super impressive. And so I'm excited about Darvin. I do think he's going to have a bit of a longer rope in terms of trying to figure out who those 11 guys are, right? And that might piss us off at sometimes. To answer your question from earlier, Anthony, I do think that there's going to be some lineup stuff where we're like, oh, this guy's still playing, you know?
Why is Cam Reddish the 4?
No, I will be mad at that. Like, I think we have a right to be mad at that if we have Cam Reddish at the 4 minutes.
All right. I want to.
Can I add really quickly just to carry over?
No, we're moving on.
Pete pointed out the X's and O's and that stuff being really good, but I thought that he pressed pretty much every right button during the playoffs in terms of adjustments, not just like schematically, but okay, this is a series where this guy needs to play more, this kind of thing. You know, there was sort of, to some degree, I think he caught some flack during the Nugget series for not going to the Rui adjustment sooner and stuff like that. But people, I think, underestimate that's a really hard thing to just like bench D'Angelo Russell going into his free agency. I know it's the playoffs and whatever, but you've been with this guy all year. He's undoubtedly one of your most talented players, even if it's not showing through in that series. It's hard to just give up on him. Like, this is not just 2K.
Well, to be fair, Harrison, the Rui sub would have been for Vando, because Rui started game 4, right? And whereas Vando started the first 3 games. Sorry.
Yes, that was more the Schroeder thing. Like, that was getting more Schroeder and less or no.
Yeah, sorry. But anyway, I just thought, like, going to the Rui adjustment on, again, shout out to Mike Malone. But going to the Rui adjustment that got so much press and whatever, like, I thought that was probably the best thing the Lakers could have done in that situation. And it didn't work out, but it was probably the best strategy they could have gone to. I thought that some of the lineup shifts during the Golden State series, during the Memphis series, like, I thought that he pressed pretty much every right adjustment button that you would want him to, even beyond some of the scheme stuff.
And was aided really in the results of those buttons, right? It's one thing to like do the process thing and you could see what goes into some of those decisions made, but then for those moves to pay the dividends that they did, right? The Lonnie Walker, the fourth quarter, all that stuff was pretty incredible to watch. At the end of the day, though, with this team, it is going to come down to what version of LeBron James are they going to get over the course of the year? What version of Anthony Davis are they going to get over the course of the year? And, I said it on the show last night on the lowdown, and it sounds a lot more ridiculous, not ridiculous, but it sounds a lot louder than it really should. But I said that, like, I don't think LeBron can be the best player on a championship team anymore. He's 39 years old, right? And I think this is really going to be the year. This really, like, I like, if you think of it like a relay race, right? Where, the guy who's getting the person who's getting the baton has to start running, and you have that baton pass that happens at speed, and I've just kind of joked that with this, LeBron has been like had to run an extra 400 meters to get to the baton to AD, who I think, though, like, when you look at the stuff that he's saying coming into this year, him like being confident enough to say, yeah, I heard the stuff that the Nuggets were saying about us. Yeah, I want to respond to that on the court. You combine that with the way that he looks, where I think he looks a lot trimmer, and I think he looks a lot more explosive and stuff. And I think those things, and then the way that he's shooting the ball and how confident he looks there, and how much more consistent the release looks all the way through the shot attempt. Harrison, like, what are you expecting? Like, where do your expectations sit for LeBron and AD? Or do you think we're getting another one of these years where, LeBron kind of watches AD over the course of the year, and at the end of the year kind of goes, all right, I'll do this myself, right? Where he plays 47 minutes and 38 seconds in the last game of the year. I think for this team to really have a legit championship shot, AD is going to have to be, special AD, more consistently, I thought, than he was in last year's playoffs. Do you think he has that? Do you think this is finally the year that AD steps into that role in this organization?
I do, and I do want to push back on the LeBron part of that a little bit, just because I think, to answer that part of the question, I think LeBron is always going to push that button when his back is against the wall. Like that has been his entire basketball life. I think at some point it's not going to be there for him. I think we started to see some of that in the second half last year, where he just did not have his legs under him after just dominating the entire first half and playing basically every second, I think, except for, I think the 1 minute he sat was in the first half, right? If I'm remembering correctly, of that game, but it doesn't matter. And so I think AD has that in him. I think we saw that during the title year, frankly, that there were games where AD was the best player on the court, in my opinion. I was ready through, I think, 1 or 2 finals games to vote. I didn't have a vote, but my imaginary vote would have gone to him for finals MVP at that point. And then LeBron really stepped up and sort of pushed them over the finish line in that series. But just the way that AD can impact the game on both ends, we've seen how good he can be when he has some level of defensive support. We saw that during the title year. I think he has a little bit more of that this season than he did in the past. And, again, a lot of this is going to depend on health. I know that that's a cop-out, but last year, he was fairly banged up by the end of that run. And I think that you could see some of that during his play. And if he can make it through and be reasonably healthy going into the playoffs, I totally believe that he can be the best player on a title team. It's just, that has been the exception rather than the rule. So I think there's some reason to doubt whether or not that is going to happen. But I think that if it does happen, I have no doubt that AD can be that guy.
AD is also in that role of being that guy. It's going to look different than it does as a lead ball handler type, right?
Yeah.
On some nights, like when he said, he wasn't special in the playoffs, I was like, he blocked more shots than anybody in the NBA in the last 12 years in the postseason this past
Anthony
year.
I didn't say he wasn't special. I like there was some consistency stuff there, right?
On offense in particular, right?
Yeah.
But he's like, and that's the point that I'm making in terms of like, what does an Anthony Davis as the best player on a championship team look like? I think it starts on the defensive end and is being a guy that can, like, similar to Dwight on the old Orlando Magic teams, where it's like you got all this skill around him and this dude is in charge of all of your stuff in the paint. Now, AD has a more diverse defensive type of presence, and he's not the mountainous human being that Dwight was in the same respect, right? But it's his dominance is going to start on the defensive end, and then on offense, I keep going back to the 5-out point. He's the guy at the top of the key in the 5-out. He's literally in the middle of it, as opposed to last year. He was basically a role guy. He was the guy with all the X's and Band-Aids on his forehead, Anthony, more than anybody, because they said the whole point of like creating open shots from last year was like, AD, go run into shit. Okay, that's going to hopefully free up something for somebody, for you, preferably. But if not, it's going to open up something for somebody else. But nobody bore the brunt of like, everybody's going to be in the paint more than Anthony Davis. Now you're going to have him more on the perimeter in open space, attacking guys like Jokic, Valanciunas off of the dribble, which is where they're really vulnerable, as opposed to being the rock that has to, bash their way down into the paint. And so I think the offense is more conducive to him having dominance on that end as well. And on the defensive end, like, he's pretty great, And so I think he can be that guy, between both ends of the floor, especially if he's got skill around him.
That Warriors series was just to bring it back to that, was some of the best defense I think I've ever seen anyone play.
He was in that Memphis series. He had John Morant taking 15-foot floaters. Like, this is the most, like,
distorting,
screw it, I am going to jump as high as I possibly can and dunk on everybody kind of player that the league currently has. And even he was like, yeah, that sucks in there.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, hey, AD, why aren't you giving us 35 also on it? It's like the guy that helps you move your couch. And you're like, he's like, hey, can I get some help moving your couch? And like, stop being so soft.
Hey, are you going to chip in on rent too? Can you?
Yeah.
Look, man, I will fully acknowledge that what AD is asked to do defensively is inordinate, right? And this year, I think it's going to be even more crazy because this team doesn't have like the perimeter defense that can stop some of these line drives, and some of that makes me a little nervous as well.
Me too.
But like when you look at like the all-time finals or playoff runs or whatever, they do tend to have some gaudy offensive stats as well as some of the stuff that you see defensively, not to the same extent with AD, but like I don't know, there were some of those games that I thought offensively like AD just like didn't show up, right? And I think every other game AD thing was always stupid. It was always overblown, but there were certainly games there where like and like the Lake, I think some of this was health based too. I think AD looks a lot healthier this year. LeBron looks a lot healthier this year than the last time we saw them last year. And I thought that like the Lakers essentially had to follow a very specific script to win their series last year, right? It was steal the first away game, compete in the second one, but at the end of the day, you get your split. Take care of the 2 games back at home, and then win hopefully in game 6, right? That's what I kept betting in all of their in both of the series that they won. That was their only approach here, and I think part of that was because of some of the inconsistencies that we saw. I'm not saying this is the only reason. The teams that they were playing were really effing good too, but like I do kind of think some of the offensive inconsistencies were something that led to having to follow that script. And I want to see AD in his, it's his age 30 year, but he is still very much in his prime. I want to see like an MVP, and he has talked about this. He is welcoming it. I want to see an MVP type season from Anthony Davis this year. That'd be really cool to see. I want to see him kind of accept that challenge and be that guy for the entirety of a season. And I think he's more than capable of it. Like talent wise, he's the most capable of it on this roster. Is that too much to ask, or is that like, hey, you just move the couch? Can you also
you think he can get some defensive player of the year votes this year?
Yeah, that'd be nice. I
think they're going to give it to Jaren Jackson again. They're like, well, we can't ignore his 4 rebounds per game. It's just.
I think Jaren Jackson's going to get it again, though, because they don't have Steven Adams this year. So, like, he's going to have to be that guy. But regardless.
Did you watch Team USA?
Yeah, I know. I'm not saying it's going to end well. All right. We will go ahead and wrap this thing up with our game here that I teased at the top. What, based on this conversation, based on years of knowing me, based on everything that is going into this, what, Harrison, do you think is going to be the thing that just annoys me way too much and I bug you about all year? And how soon do you think I start bugging you about it?
So I actually wrote down 5 things over the course of, yeah. These are almost all like free spaces on the bingo board for anyone who listens to Anthony. And, some of you could probably guess what some of these are going to be, but I already know. Number 1 odds on favorite, is going to be Lakers haven't signed a 15th roster spot yet. Like, hey, Anthony's going to go on some rant. Like when the Lakers are dealing with they're going to deal with their first wave of injuries. Like 2 guys are hurt, whatever. Some guys are playing. The 2-way guys are playing, and Colin Castleton gets some minutes, and Anthony just gets really upset, and he's like, guys, I'm just. Me, I'm just all about process. Like, I don't care about Jeannie Buss's checkbook. I don't care. If I want an owner to spend money. And why do I care about her luxury tax payments for signing this 15th roster spot, as a guy to back up insert player that got injured here or whatever, and to have them as an emergency option. And I just don't understand. The Clippers would do this, and despite them cutting like 11 million in luxury tax payments or whatever it was this year, like I think the Suns would do this. And so I just want an owner like that. And then the next one is going to be who the Lakers signed for their 15th roster spot when they sign a buyout guy. Like Anthony's going to get really mad about the person that they do eventually sign. Not only was it too late in the season, but it's like, how does this guy fit? I don't understand how they think this buyout guy is going to fit in with the identity of this team that they've cultivated over the year that I have criticized all year. But like, I just don't like this guy when they sign.
As long as it isn't Andre Drummond. Although he makes a lot of sense, but still, like as long as it isn't Andre Drummond and he's given a starting spot, I think I'll be all right.
when they sign like Rudy Gay for the 15th roster spot, you're going to get really upset about it. I put down just Cam Reddish just in general. I think like at some point is just going to. And then sort of, like pivoting off of those first two, you're going to get mad that they don't make a trade quickly enough. It's like, well, we saw what happened last year, guys. You want the most amount of runway that you can possibly have. I don't understand why they need to wait till this, the February trade deadline. Get the trade done in January or, December. I think it's December, right? When more guys become
December like 15th.
15th or something. Yeah. And then you're going to get mad about one of the trades that they do make. Once they make the trade too late in the season. These are all things that I am predicting.
My doctor's like listening to this right now. It's like, oh, that's why his blood pressure is so high, because all of this shit is so predictable.
You can track your blood pressure like on your smartwatch over the course of the year based on
every
like
time Cam Reddish enters
NBA official date is nearby.
Yeah. Pete, do you have any guesses?
So I think it's going to be with Darvin and lineups is going to be the main one. I think that basically we got 12 guys, I would argue 11 guys, that have some degree of argument to play, with Reddish being the 12th. That Darvin is going to... No, man, listen. Darvin's going to give those guys a shot, right? Darvin's going to give those 12 guys a shot to one degree or another. And I think that we're... I don't want to say anxiety level because the mood is good in Lakerland, but the like expectations, the revved up, ready for the start of the race is very high going into opening night. And I think there's going to be some level of growing pains or like figuring out the bench lineups in particular, the like last 6 minutes of the first and third quarters in particular. I think we're closer to where we need to be at the start of the second quarter, but I think those groups, there's going to be a certain amount of like figuring out, like, and the Wood and Rui combination is just an element of that right there. That I think there's part of that that's going to look bad. That's going to be like, are you still staying with this lineup? Type of thing that we have so much.
That well, huh?
Right? Yeah.
Hear me say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Christian Wood net rating, you're gonna get really upset.
Oh, there you go. That really zeroes it in on on what I'm talking around there.
It's gonna be someone in one of those groups has like a really bad net rating because of the group, and Anthony's gonna be like really upset. It's just like I just like numbers, and they tell us things, and they confirm what I'm seeing
like
with my
Jackson
eyes.
Hayes' net rating is gonna be great, and Wood's gonna be terrible, and I'm like, why are we still doing this? Yeah, I could see this coming.
Yeah, it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to know that some of this stuff can be read ahead of time. And Pete, you mentioned a point here that I am absolutely fascinated by. I didn't want to make it a full segment on here because it's so intangible and it's so based off of the bubbles that we all exist in social media, right? But this is like, Lakers fans have very real expectations for this team, wherever they sit, right? I think they're a championship contender, not a favorite, but a contender. And they are certainly one of the favorites, I think, to come out of the Western Conference. And we'll see whoever they would face in the finals if that does happen. If the Nuggets are still damn good as well. And the beginning of the season is rife with tough games. Like they have a tough opening to the season. And I am really curious how Lakers fans are going to react to, some of their expectations, maybe having gotten away from them in the preseason. I have probably played a role in that. We have all probably played a role in that. But I am really curious how everybody responds to that first stretch where they lose like 3 out of 5, or that first stretch where well, no.
I'm not curious at all.
I know what the response is going to be. It's people are going to be mad.
I do kind of wonder, because one thing that was really kind of interesting this year, the Lakers got swept in the Western Conference Finals, right? They like, all things considered, didn't really get that close to winning a championship. Mm-hmm. And yet we are all kind of high-fiving each other over the fact that they brought that core back. And that is really interesting to me. That is not the way that Lakers fans in my lifetime have approached things, right? We haven't typically had that context or that understanding of the context where of course it makes sense to bring a group back that was one of the best teams in the NBA last year, right when they got together. And of course, I want to see what that group looks like right off the bat. But couldn't you picture like Bill Plaschke writing a column about like, are we sure it was a good idea to bring back a team that got swept in the West? Like that was the thing that happened.
Last year and a half probably gave most Lakers fans also like a greater appreciation. The year and a half preceding the run that they made to go to the conference finals probably is like, well, yeah, I mean, conference finals, that's still pretty good, like obviously we want, it's everybody measures success in banners, but it was a lot more fun than, the previous spring.
There's
right?
also
Go ahead.
Yes, certainly so. But I think the nature of it being thrown together, like it was such a wild year in that we were scratching and clawing for almost the entire season, which is not a normal regular season at all. But I was freaking watching OKC games in November, like scoreboard watching, be like, all right, they dropped it. You know what I'm saying? Tell me you guys were doing the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And so it was an insane year. And like one thing that we always
the Jazz, when the Jazz like opened their season off, like the way that they did, it was like,
no,
what the
yeah, exactly.
Damn it.
We're looking, it was similar last year. The schedule was similar last year where we're like, oh, that's a tough game. That's a tough game. Well, at least we got Utah. We're gonna win that one. Oh, we got Utah twice. Great. We got a couple wins in here. And then they're like, they start out, oh, what the fuck? And so it's like, so it was just like, and then
Lauri Markkanen is Larry Bird now? What is going on?
And then like Dennis and TB get the same, who were both very helpful to very good on the Lakers, like both get the same injury and are out. Anyway, so we're scratching and clawing for the whole year. LeBron and AD are taking turns being out. We still don't get them for more than 3 games at a time.
Very courteous of them. We do have to say in retrospect to like avoid to manage to like stagger out their injuries mostly.
Yeah, that's the biggest part of the turnaround last season that is not talked about. That like, well, yeah, that was the stretch where both of the guys were healthy, and I'm using quotey fingers, right? Where we're like, oh, LeBron didn't have his legs. Yeah, he had a like foot injury, and same thing with AD where he had that foot injury. We were like, we're not sure if he's going to be back. There was.
I remember
Anthony and I did a pod reacting to that news. Right. We were like, I mean, they may be out of the playoff race. Like this is, going to like. I thought the season was done when that news came out.
And so you've got both of your stars on bad feet with a group of new guys that you had together for like 20 games. And so the context of bringing the roster back, there's a good argument to be made for like, well, what happens if they have a training camp together? Like basketball's a 5-man coordinated activity. Like it helps to know what the other team is going to do. And that's part of why Denver is good, is those guys have been playing together for years. Mm-hmm. And so there's some added value with the exact same people. And we did change a few, but with the exact same core at the very least, coming back and getting those reps. That said, I do think that the first part of this season is that trial run, right? That like, oh, what do you play like when you're not desperately fighting for your life for a playoff spot? Because that whole like scratching and clawing lasted the whole way through. Like, when did we actually move into the, like, we're actually in the playoff point? I think it was like game 73. I remember every time we'd get to freaking late. 500.
It was very late, yeah.
Every time we get to 500, we'd lose the next game. And so that whole, this should be a different type of season. Like, are you rotating on defense like your playoff life depends on it? Maybe not. And so we'll see where we're at in February. I do think that there's a good argument to be made, Anthony, of like, hey, this might not have a happy ending. It might not work out the same way that it did before, but I think we'll know a lot more by the time February rolls around.
Anthony, can I just add that Pete's talk about the trade deadline, the post trade deadline additions guys, and the guys that we were talking about as like meaningful impact contributors, in helping with that title chase. They're on the list of things that you're going to be upset about. Dark horse candidate is there some night in the regular season where Mo Bamba and Malik Beasley both have good nights, and you're like, Lakers could have used these guys. If they would have just been willing to pay more taxes,
Yeah, that's a good one.
You don't think Malik Beasley shooting could help this team right now while Gabe Vincent's in a cold stretch?
Or Walker playing well in like Brooklyn or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm not too worried about Beasley because there was a report that they're going to put him on the other team's best perimeter player.
The coach said that. He's just like, I'm expecting him to take the toughest defensive assignment.
It's like I don't have to worry about feeling bad about Beasley anymore. Not that I was all that worried about
And
that.
even Malik
in
Beasley's like,
general.
I have to get mentally ready for this. I know that there's going to be a lot of nights it doesn't go well. It's like, oh no. Okay.
all the nights.
Yeah.
It is not going to go well any of the nights. All right, guys. I have had an absolute blast here. I don't want to take up too much
Likewise.
more of your time because we are, like I said, on NBA Eve. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in the way that you did. Thank you. And just generally, like the amount of excitement when I even tweeted out the clip of us laughing at the Clippers and the number of people like were just like so stoked that the three of us were going to get together. That stuff means quite a bit as I reach this advanced age that I am currently sitting at. That stuff warms this old cold heart. But thank you, everybody, for that support. Thank you, Harrison, for hopping on. That is Harrison of SB Nation. Thank you, Pete, for hopping on. That is Pete of LFR and of the Los Angeles Lakers. I am Anthony Irwin, and this has been the Lakers Lounge. Talk to you soon.